Teď. Čapa. Ne?
Zkouška? Nějak celkově to nejde, že? Všechny.
Halo.
Jo?
Halo.
Už to jde?
Stop chatting.
Hey.
Back to the work.
Hey.
So this afternoon session will be more communal and open to discussions or questions or interruptions or whatever. And it is much more, I think, is related to the hermit. Yeah. They should come, you know. And to, let's say, the today situation of today and tomorrow maybe, even if the tomorrow looks a little bit dim. So there is a presentation of. We will start with Gertrude, who is coming from Vienna, and she went several times. She visited in the 90s Plasy, and she also managed to invite some Prague artists to Austria. So there was this moment of exchanges, and after which will be a 10 minutes presentation, and then there is a change of our or interruption of our original concept, and Petr Bergman will talk about his projects, because there is a big part of the public who needs to leave and wants to listen to him, and then we continue with Michael Delia and Tomáš Ruler and David Miller, who is on Zoom. But anybody who wants to jump in is welcome. So.
Thank you, Milos. The title of my presentation will be, of my small presentation, will be "No Man is an Island." And we heard about Plasy already, and I read several contributions in the catalog, with which I agree. As an artist, I'm a Vienna-based artist, but you asked me to summarize the situation in Vienna, more or less. And I can talk about it from the standpoint of a young artist at that time. So what were the characteristics of the 1990s for young artists at that time? It was a time of upheaval in Europe. The Iron Curtain fell. The Cold War was over. Shortly before this, in 1988, I made a kind of important gesture as work when I came to Berlin for the very first time. Can I have the photo number 1? It's we see very little. It's very nice, but it will be shown, I think, better in the online. I was invited by a gallery in Berlin-Kreuzberg, and I decided at the time to enter Berlin from the east in order to grasp the meaning about where I find myself now. I made a work about the Berlin Wall in 1988. a little boy from the couple that hosted me digged and buried small iron balls into the ground along the Berlin Wall with the assistance of his parents. The boy liked my steel balls, which had been installed as a line in the opening of at the opening of the gallery, and he wanted to pluck them all from the floor. A year later, the wall fell, and shortly after this, the Iron Curtain opened. My wall piece, called Setzung B, B is for Berlin, 1507-89, was then shown in Vienna as serigraphy on the wall. I can explain it later for who wants to know more. I would need the photo number 2, please. I will explain you what is on the image later. Anyway, Vienna moved closer to the heart of the international developments and became focal point of a European cultural scene that was opening towards the east. In 1995, Georg Schöllhammer and Hedwig Sachsenhuber from Vienna founded the magazine Springer. As researchers and curators, they were since then engaged in issues of urban and cultural transformation, focusing Central and Eastern Europe. Some of you might also know the institution Kulturkontakt Austria in Vienna. Recently, I met Annemarie Türk again, who celebrated with a nice laudatio the Ukrainian poet and Kramer Prize winner Tanya Malyarchuk. And Mrs. Türk was our important partner when we had invited Eastern co-artists. In 1989, the Kulturkontakt Austria Association began its operations as an intermediary between artists, cultural institutions and companies, as one of the first European institutions to actively promote culture in the described countries. Similar to the city of Graz, which from the beginning and up to now has established institutions like Kulturvermittlung Steiermark that would give residencies to Balkan and Southeast European artists. I'll have an exhibition next week in Graz, and my involved co-artists from Belgrade will profit from such an art residency. I have some material, you can see it later. Photo 3, please. Talking about my own biography during the 1990s, it is a matter of fact that every year where there were some events going on with the Eastern countries inspired by them, even together with my students at University of Applied Arts in Vienna, to whom in 93 I handed over my own invitation for Gallery On in Poznan. They made a nice exhibition there as a semester work, and we printed a catalog. In 97, I got a grant and could have chosen Chicago or Krakow, Poland, for a 4-month studio offered by our ministry. I took the latter and experienced Krakow. Sorry, Michael, if I didn't take USA. But at that time, I really was interested in my neighbors. And I have one contact, a recent contact to Krakow-based Anna. I always have feel some kind of joy when I meet my Eastern neighbors. I don't know why. No man is an island, in fact, but some places become islands for a certain time, such as Plassy, or in my case, born in Styria. It was the Schwarzenbergsche Meierei in Scheifling, beneath the ruins of the castle Schrattenberg, starting in the 1990s. Meanwhile, the initiative is named Hotel Pupik, a place off the center with 2 buildings, originally a former stable and a farmhouse, offered by Karel Schwarzenberg, the later foreign minister in Prague. His noble family has a castle in the area in Murau and possesses woods in Styria. These summer symposiums were founded by Heimo Wallner, Uli von Bank-Schädler and others as an art association. Meanwhile, it entered in a residency program for artists from abroad and always musicians too, open to them. It is still very much alive and co-organized by a younger collective, among them Johanna, the daughter of Heimo. According to Heimo Wallner, Pupik is a quote from Marian Palla, Czech name for navel. I met Palla as a resident artist at the Schrattenberg Symposium Hammerschlag in 1991. There were mainly Czech and Slovak artists invited, recommended by Josef Čereš. I talked to Michael Murin about it when we had lunch, because he was one of the artists. And Czechoslovakia was still one land. Thus, Heimo Wallner was a pioneer and very early inviting Eastern colleagues. Speaking of connection, Plassi Schrattenberg and vice versa, it was actually Heimo who introduced me to Plassi initiator Milos. These were exciting years. Schrattenberg had become a place to visit every summer. There the intermedial symposia had picked up speed and now encompassed the sonic, the cinematic, the digital. My first encounter with the person and work of Phil Niblock was there and therefore unforgettable. Photo 4. Through Milos, I participated in Plassi 3 times. The first time I met the musician and visual artist Michael Delia from USA, who still likes to cook food à la Napoli for hermit friends. Just recently, he painted my portrait as part of the Friends series. A very long friendship. Florence Neal from New York was a participant in the discourse on documentation of the previous Plassi symposia. She, in turn, brought me and others from Plassi circuit, such as Martin Z, to her Kendler drawing space in Brooklyn for a solo exhibition. This image is behind me. And mine was there in 98. And after that, I went directly to Niblock's Experimental Intermedia Foundation for a video presentation, first in New York and later in Ghent, Belgium. We heard already about Phil Niblock in this gathering. And would you send the video now? But very reduced, the sound. Let me come to a conclusion while showing a video from 97. Italy, et tutt'uno, it's all one. In the occasion of the Osmosis Symposium of my own Italian group, with music from Rajesh Mehta, who I met performing in Plassi. Such a symposium is a treasure trove of future activities. It was not unlike an academy, but more flexible and diverse, cross-generational and anti-hierarchic, also more chaotic. I have taught at art academies. I have also co-founded artist groups, such a symposium means quality and togetherness and experience of performances. It remains sensually amplified in the echoes of the individuals. There is a mutuality in showing off to each other, of free experimenting, of observing, of arguing, and importantly, of eating and drinking together. The notes of networking, whether Schattenberg, Hotel Pupik, Placi, Hermit Foundation, New York Experimental Intermedia, or Milan, O Artoteca, the latter through Sara Serighelli from my Italy network since the mid-1990s, seem to have something in common. These strong, often very suggestive places are connected to concrete people and their team, who are always enablers and fundamentally non-competitive. They are experimental in their artistic attitude, as well as informed, transnational, curious, and cooperative. They are experimental, I said already, but they freely offer food for mind and body and for networking. They should be seen as culturally essential and therefore supported just like museums and galleries are. Unlike such institutions, they are not a governmental or private sector container for secured art, where cash flows, curated discourse, and public outreach can attract a larger audience and introduce them to culture. So thanks to the museum here and to the archive that they are providing. It is a different matter with the anarchic power for such kind of symposia I was describing, which are often justifiably considered legendary. They gather the best minds. Even if they get tired after a decade or sooner and their funding dries up, they will nevertheless stand the test of time. The best example probably is Hermit Foundation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for very positive reflection. Beside to mention Schrattenberg and Heimowner, who is still running the project in Austria. There is, I would like to mention just another one, which is called Café Družba, and it is just on the border with the Czech-Austrian, run by John Tylo, who also was organizing much smaller and decent things where he invited many people from Slovakia, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Croatia, but also from Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, I learned recently that John died about 5 months ago. Okay, so then we have Petr Bergman, who will talk about his utopic projects in Broumov, and also maybe what is his experience from it.
Okay, thank you. I have some materials here so you can have a look. This is my recent work. Yeah, this is what I'm doing. This is for free. You can take, and these are like from previous years. If you can have a look, if you want to have a look. This I already introduced, and I will be talking about it. This is a book about the squatting and autonomous centers scene in Prague. And this is the interview book. You can have a look, and I'm also talking about it there. But these are all in Czech, so unfortunately, it's we don't really have English-speaking or foreign audience, so we have no need to publish in English. So sorry for that, but you can just, there are many pictures, so you can get your clue from the pictures you will find. My experience with alternative art comes from the period of the second half of 80s, when I started to be active on the fields of underground culture in Prague. And I think this is where the cultural boom in 90s was generated from, because the underground culture was already very well developed in Prague and northern Bohemia especially, and Pilsen, and there were certain locations, but mainly Prague, of course. Also Brno was quite active, where alternative art was already produced in very serious and significant way, even if it was repressed very heavily by the communist power. And I joined the punk movement in the beginning of 80s, and there was really a lot of events happening in the second half of 80s. I was talking on the lunch about it with the mates on the table, and that we only lately we realized from the work of the colleagues, historians, that many of these events that happened during second half of 80s have been actually organized or even supported by money from the secret services, from STB, secret police, because they changed their strategy from the times at the end of 70s and the beginning of 80s, when they were trying to repress all kind of so-called second culture. But they realized that this way they are losing connection to the underground, and they changed the strategy so that they were trying to infiltrate the punk movement especially, and they just hired many agents amongst punks, and they were feeding the punk scene with money so that they could have concerts, festivals, and similar events. And even some people from Prague can remember that in the end of 80s, really like 88, 89, you would have official, or even 87 maybe already started, you would have official festivals of rock and punk music happening in Prague that were organized by official structures. So the reason was that they were trying to infiltrate and monitor what is going on in these fields of unorganized youth, because they knew that they are not able to keep track of it. They are not able to repress it anymore. So at least they wanted to have good knowledge about it. So this was a situation that we were really having a lot of art events, and we were not aware of it, that it is really happening under the control of the state authorities. And only recently, really like last 5 years backwards, we are starting to learn about the circumstances. Anyway, this was very good for like preparation time for the 90s, because many of the people from the underground and punk movement have been involved in organization, in bands, in alternative theater and so on. So then when the revolution came, the scene was already there. And in that time, I was working as a journalist, mainly on fields of underground music, and I was writing to many countries like United States, France, Germany, and so on. I was writing reports from the Czech scene. So I was very well connected, and I started to bring Czech musical bands and later also alternative theaters to Western countries, but also Slovakia, Hungary, but mainly to West, and bring in foreign artists to Czech Republic. So I started to do a lot of tours, and there I realized how developed is the autonomous scene in Western countries like Germany, Switzerland, Holland, Belgium, Italy, you know, everywhere you would have autonomous centrum or centro sociale or some, you know, squatted places and so on. And immediately in 1990, this started to be attractive for Czech art scene as well. So the very first, what happened was already in 1990 in Prague, the big event under the Stalin monument, where there was a huge anti-atomic bunker, and this was just filled with art and concerts and everything. And as a backup of this festival, we were hiring, renting a building in center of Prague, and there all the agencies and all the producers of art have been placed from alternative scene, and we're cooperating in one building under one roof, which was excellent because everybody knew each other and we could share experience, we could share contacts and everything. But this was actually the first thing which was repressed by the new power after the revolution, you know. So after all those years, when alternative culture was being repressed by the communism, now when we had the free society, finally, again, already in autumn 1990, there was the first activity of the alternative art repressed, and we were evicted from that building. So that was like the sign that we are not welcome. Even this was like, I call myself a veteran of the lost cultural war, and I'm retired already, you know, and just enjoying these talks and publications where I'm telling their memories about the good times, you know, and gardening, exactly, yes. But still, you know, in 1990, 91, 92, we believed, I was 22, 23 in that time, so we believed that we can really have own clubs and we can have our art centers and we can run it ourselves, you know, and there was big euphoria for young people because it was us, the young people, the students who made the revolution, right? So the first year and 2 years and maybe 3 years after the revolution, there was a lot of support for young people, and we would even receive some money. And when we came up with some initiative, like we want to make a gallery, we want to make a art space, we want to make cultural center, people were like, oh wow, this is a great idea, you know, so let's talk about it. And yes, you can have it, you can do it, you know. And yeah, we can support some money, you know, and so on and so on. But already in 93 and 94, they realized that the young people can really do it, and they really will run these places, and they got scared of it. And they really were frightened. Like, what is it, you know? We just cannot have young people do their stuff, you know? It's impossible. They just cannot do it themselves. We have to supervise them because they will take drugs and they will abuse children and they will eat our food, you know, and I don't know what, you know, and they will steal our jobs, you know. And now suddenly the young people became enemies and had to be repressed. And there were many initiatives you can find in the book, many squatted houses like Zlatá loď, the Golden Boat, Ladronka, our Black Hand Center, many other places. And the new regime really took strong action to repress it. If it was really illegal place, squatted, they would use police force. If it was legal place like our place was, where we had regular contract, they would use economical or legal steps to destroy these places. And or places like Roxy, like Bunker, they would use reasons like noise in the evening, or I don't know, bad parking, you know, or dirt around the place, and so on. So they were all the time pushing and pushing and pushing. And suddenly, all these places, like Bunker and our place and I don't know what else, many places have been closed one after another. And basically in 95, 96, 97, you would have mainly all of these places closed. And by 2000, it was all gone. The only places that still remain is Roxy, but it became completely commercial, so you wouldn't have any space for alternative culture there anymore. And Rock Cafe, which is the same, it's just purely commercial place. You can rent it for really huge amounts of money. But the places like our place was where Roxy was in the beginning, where young artists with no name, you know, they could come and they could have studio space, they could have gallery space, they could have rehearsal room, theaters could form their performances and do their first presentations, and they didn't need to pay anything, you know, and they could even take the money from the box which they collected, and that was their payment. So this was already impossible. And then I left Prague in those years, around 2000, and I moved to Broumov region, which is in northeastern Bohemia, and there, you know, it was village place really. Broumov has 5,000 inhabitants, the town, and the region around another 20,000. So it's really like the whole region is like a small town, and we found old brewery there in Broumov town, and the brewery was empty, and there came this new initiative to change the brewery into this art space again. You know, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and in 2001 we opened the space, and it was lasting until 2003, and then it was closed as well. So that was like the last initiative that became really nationwide and international, that so many people participated, so many people joined, that we had like 250 artists every year come in, and we had the summer festival, which was lasting 4 months, and for the whole time we had workshops and lectures and big exhibitions where 40, 50 artists would be participating from Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic, because we are on this Czech, German, Polish territory. So we were doing everything Czech, German, Polish, like the literary prize and the crisscross exhibition and art workshops and the alternative theater performances and everything. So we were focused on the Czech, German, Polish relations, but not only. You know, we had artists from Israel, Japan, Russia, whatever, you know. And then after this was closed, and we realized that already nobody really wants to support anything like this, because we had the governments, we had very unfriendly to culture development. I have to say one thing, that since 90s, I was very much involved on political scene. I was never a politician, but I was powerful activist in environmental and human rights activism, and I had access to politicians, to ministers. I had access to President Havel and so on. And I have to say one thing, you know, that in 90s we could very easily use this power of activism and get connected with ministers, with politicians in parliament, with the president. And we were really receiving very positive feedback from them for a very long time. And if things didn't work, I could within a week or two, I could sit in the minister office and I could talk to the minister and explain the problem to him. And if it was Minister of Interior, if it was Minister of Justice, if it was Minister of Environment or Minister of Culture, it didn't matter. Or Minister of Foreign Affairs. We had access everywhere, and we could talk to those people, and they would listen to us. And by the end of the 90s, this access started to limit, and when Havel left the scene in 2003 or something, it was gone, you know. And from 2003 further, the political scene, which was there to serve the people until that time, and we could really do things through the politicians, and it contains the politicians on the local level, you know, like mayors and county people and so on. Now it became closed. It really became like cartel, like a mafia cartel, which is doing their own stuff, and you are not important. You have no access to the decision-making processes, and if you have a trouble or you have an idea, nobody cares. Yeah. So this I started to realize since like 2003, 2004, and further, and this was the time when I realized that for young people and non-established, alternative, free, independent art, it's just impossible. You have to be covered by institutions or big investments, you know, like Kunsthalle in Prague, for example, where you have huge amounts of money in your bag. Then you can do stuff. But if you are independent artist and you want to do your stuff, you have almost no chance if you don't want to do really like complete underground thing. And another
sorry,
thing
Petr, can you wrap it up for us positively? Can you give us a positive message as a conclusion?
No. Yeah, I can. And one more negative, which I want to conclude, is that in those 80s in the underground and in 90s, you could join movement. You know, you would not be alone if you do things. Even if you are activist or artist or whatever, producer, you would be part of a movement. And this is also gone, in my opinion. That now, since 2000 further, we really are on the peak of individualism, and it's very hard to find allies for whatever you want to do. You know, so I don't have a positive conclusion, in my opinion, because I don't see much choice and much possibilities. And with the government that we have now, for example, and with the Minister of Culture that we have now, and I'm in close touch with him actually, I don't see much future for independent art, you know. So that's about my experience, and sorry for negative message.
We can have time maybe for one question or note, remark.
It's difficult to.
I think we can address it later in the discussion, because this is, I think, an important topic, like this independent culture and autonomous centers, autonomous culture, and so on. So I think we can get back to it.
What does it mean, independent and autonomous? And so it's a difficult discussion, but let's go into the next. Is David online? Yeah. Yes, so he's online. So because he's in a Lethbridge in Alberta, and he's 8 hours. I don't know if behind us. So it's very early in the morning, and I wouldn't like to torture David. To be awake. David, of course, he couldn't come. We couldn't pay his travel, and he couldn't pay his travel as well. But David did actually prepared something for the program here when he was 3 weeks in Czech Republic. but we couldn't organize it here. So he will talk about some aspect of his experience from Place, which I expect dealing with some kind of pedagogical issues, which it's not actually mentioned so much in the exhibition, but since 95 until 99, there were regularly coming students with Tomáš Šurler, with Vladimír Kokolia, with Adela Matasová, and also I saw from Brno and Prague to be there, to participate as usually passively in the festival, but also staying for a week. So it was somehow trespassing the system of Hermit Foundation into a kind of unofficial education field. So, David, are you ready? David, can you hear us? David is teaching in Lethbridge photography and media. David?
Audio there.
Okay, we hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. And please be short, 10 minutes.
Yes. And can you activate my video for me? Because I can't seem to control it from here. It seems locked.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, my video is locked. So I won't be able to share my screen, unfortunately. You can hear me, but you can't see the pictures. Let me see if I can share a screen. Let me try. Can you see that? Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's not that early, actually, in Lethbridge, and I'm speaking to you from Blackfoot Confederacy territory here in Western Canada, in Southern Alberta. I've provisionally titled this talk 1995, 1,995 Gifts in Motion. And I'd like to begin by mentioning that back in, Milos, you'll be able to correct me, but I think it's 1994 or so. That's when we met, and we met in Amsterdam. Milos invited me to the Czech Republic. I had already traveled to the Czech Republic in 1992 when I first moved from Canada, where I'd been living in Halifax, going to and teaching and so on, and working in Halifax, Nova Scotia, through the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design there. And I moved to Amsterdam. Eventually I met Milos, and there's Milos reading in Manes, I believe in 1994, and that's just before we set off for Plassey, where he promised me good food and circumstances. So we traveled together there. And in Plassey, I met many wonderful individuals. What I'd like to talk about today is just a couple of the works that I made in Plassey, and highlighting the conditions that allowed me to make the sorts of works that I was making at the time. Prior to moving to Europe, I did a work called Condemned Works in Halifax, and this is the kind of work that I was interested in as a young artist in Halifax. Here, I won't linger on this work very long, but and you might not be able to read the upper sign, but it says, "If you don't take your hands out of my pockets," and then down below in red stencil, "I will have to take you down." And this is a building that was condemned and eventually destroyed by the provincial government in Nova Scotia, Canada. This was a building that was occupied by several artists, myself included, where we had studios. So this is before and after the demolition and during the demolition. In Amsterdam, just prior to meeting Miloš, I'm not sure if Miloš actually saw this show, but at some point, and it's hard for me to recall actually, someone told me that there was this Czech artist curator living in Amsterdam that I should probably get in touch with, and that was Miloš, and eventually we did meet up. So in Amsterdam, at an alternative space called W139, I did this work here, which was 2 live video projections in their space, in a live burning candle. The title of my presentations loosely addresses motion and the atmosphere in Plassey, the character of the kinds of works that I was doing and interested in. And though at the time I was perhaps less able to articulate what the motivations were, what I have found in the subsequent years is that the work, the conditions for working as an artist, as a young artist then, were very much tied to the possibility of movement, and these installations that I was doing at the time did address that somehow, or came about as a result. So this is in Utrecht, and I believe that Miloš saw this work, and it started out as a map, a very naive map actually of Europe, where this charting a kind of trajectory for myself across Europe and across North America, kind of a zone of interaction that I was contemplating at the time. And this is the installation that I made, some long piano wires attached to suitcases that made sound. Now, I believe that for the most part, all of this work would not have been possible without these alternative spaces. This is Casco in Utrecht, which at that time was just establishing itself. W139 was a well-known artist-run, alternative artist-run center in Amsterdam. And I was coming from an environment in Canada that had a well-established artist-run network across the country here since the early 60s. And like in Europe and in the Czech the Czech Republic, these spaces were set up by artists to support so-called independent alternative practices that were not being supported by the commercial establishment and or the state-funded museums and so on. So kind of non-commercial activity. The last work that I made in Plassey, the very last work before I get to the other works, is called Hermit Archive Falling, and it's a sound recording that I made of the part of the archive of Hermit literally falling and recording that sound, and that was published by Avatar Studios in Quebec City in 2000. This is the remnants of that archive falling, and I don't have the recording to share with you this afternoon. So this is me in 1995 in Plassey, busy with something, and here's I'm just going to run through a few pictures that I made while I was there. Some people celebrating the summer solstice around an afternoon fire. And like many of the presenters today, or some of the presenters today, talking about their experiences at a Hermit Symposium, it was the camaraderie, the collaborative nature, the open atmosphere that the space allowed for many improvised interactions and wonderful meals and so on. And some of the people that I met there, all very, here's Michael, who I know who's in the audience, and I thought I would show this picture to the audience, one of his instruments. Some of the people I met, and an animal that I met there. The work that I made in Plassey that really continues to represent what my practice is about is a piece called Paradise, or Rye, and it consists of a number of cast iron objects and chain that I mounted onto a working clock here in the Sipka, or the granary, and you can see the clock tower at the center. So anyone who's been to Plassey, to the monastery, will absolutely recognize this building. When I got to Plassey, working site specifically as I was, well, contextually, I was trying to come to terms with the vastness of the monastery itself, how to interact with it, like what could I do there that might connect with what was there, in fact. An environment that was quite alien to me in many respects, like physically, the built environment. So I walked around, and in the background in this photograph, you'll see the clock tower. You'll see the monastery down in the river valley. And here again, so the situation of the monastery seemed very interesting to me, apart from its specific history as a monastery itself, like how it was incorporated into the town to connect the past to the present at that time, was something that I was trying to do. And here it is again and again. So inside the clock tower, there's a series of clock weights that drove the clock mechanism, but also rang 4 bells. And each of these clock weights were named in the, I believe in the 16th century. I'm looking at my notes here. And what I decided to do was replace the, you can see this remarkable configuration of stones, some apparently original, and together with machine parts and a kind of an ad hoc assemblage of things that had body volume and weight that would help drive this clock. And Robert Drozda, the clock keeper in Plassey, kept this going for many, many years. And there's actually a little publication that was published on the clock and Robert's interactions with it over, I believe, about a 50-year period. So this is something that he did to get the clock running again. So 1995, things at Plassey had deteriorated over the years, and Robert got this clock to work again, and it was telling the time and ringing the time throughout the day. When I saw this configuration, I was really inspired by his ingenuity and perseverance. And so I decided to replace the sack of rocks that's tethered to one of the clock movements with rope with a more substantial material, something that I felt would be more lasting and in keeping with the clock weights while preserving the remarkable and beautiful assemblage that Robert had put together. So I replaced it with an equal weight in cast iron and chain. So here's the element that I replaced with my things below, and that's the work that I made there once it was set up. So each of these objects was weighed, and there it is from below as the clock movements move up. Now it's called Paradise because the clock movement itself is called Rai in Czech, which means paradise. The process of making the work involved a number of people, and again, that collaborative aspect. So here's Ivo Kornatovsky with me at the foundry and with the foundry manager. And I'm making a pitch to the foundry manager to enlist his labor force to help me produce this artwork. And when I open up my suitcase and lay these items, these objects on the table that I had purchased in the local stores in Plassey, laughter broke out, and eventually he agreed to do this work for us. And the objects that I cast were, and here's some of the people that were making the work for me in the foundry. I don't know if this foundry still exists. Just go, so some of the objects are, you can see a bottle of beer, pack of cigarettes, a recorder, canned food, apples, various fruit, chocolate bar, bread, things of a nature that people were consuming, that I was consuming at that time. And somehow I was trying to make a connection, as slight as it was, but trying to make a connection between the moment that I was there in Plassey in 1995 and this incredibly rich and partially, to me, opaque past that I was surrounded and immersed inside of, the past of the monastery itself, and the great traditions that had evolved and taken place, evolved in Plassey and throughout Central Europe, actually. So this is the work that I did there. Milos asked me to speak about pedagogy. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here, or maybe I'll just go back to this picture here. I really can't say very much about like the teaching that may have happened at or during the symposiums that I was a part of, but as a result of being there, I was able to, I eventually met many students actually in my capacity as a visiting instructor in Brno and in Prague. And I guess the one thing, the thought that has come to my mind, and I've been a teacher for many years and continue to be a teacher of art, and the thing that comes to mind, the great difference that is possible to reflect on now is that for example, when I went to Brno, to FAVU, I will never forget the first day I walked into the school where the lights weren't on. It was dark. The students came to greet me very enthusiastically, happily. Professor Miller, you're here, finally. And I was there to teach photography, and they opened up he said, let's show you around. So they brought me to a studio. They opened up this big cabinet. They had lots of space, great spaces in this art school. And there was like one old broken camera in there. And I realized that there was really very little that the students had in Brno, that much less than what I was accustomed to as a student myself and in the institutions that I was teaching at prior, where we had, state-funded studios and labs and workshops and lots of equipment and technicians to, maintain all of these things. And very little of that seemed to exist, particularly for photo media at that time. And it was just evolving. It's just evolving. But the students themselves were incredibly open, as I was, and we all were able to improvise together. And those conditions did not hamper their work. And this was the great lesson that I learned through my experiences, during my experiences in the Czech Republic and in other places, but particularly in Brno, that the creative, creativity and art making and criticality and independent thought did not need very much to occur. It just needed a space, and it needed people to gather and to commune and to work things out. And the students that I interacted with in Brno remain among the most engaged and thoughtful and sensitive students I've ever worked with. So that's really, I'll just kind of wrap it up there. I won't take any more time here. I'm happy to answer questions or just to be part of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for this great contribution. We should move on, and I propose Tomáš Roller speaks now.
No, Tomáš is one of the participants of Hermit who also has his own text in the catalog, so you can check it there. And the issue he will speak about is referring to the 90s, his kind of position or opinion about. Yeah, is it true? What? Are you talking about the 90s Sure, yeah.
That's what you wanted. Hello, everyone. I wanted to share with you an image, just on background from my performance in Plassy. Hopefully, it will go on. Yeah, is there? Anyway, start not to take the time, so I will try to be very short. Title of my address is From Underground to the Ground and From the Position to the Disposition. Because I consider the Hermit Symposiums rooted in tradition of alternative culture and therefore among the most important activities of the 90s, at least in Czech Republic at the time, because it was not already Czechoslovakia. After '89, most local artists hoped to get aligned with official positions and, of course, realized their careers mainly abroad and mainly in the West, while Hermit was one of the few activities not aimed towards the cultural establishment. Although Hermit was supported by grants, this is okay. Yeah, just, I prepared some images, but that does not make sense. Where have we finished? Yeah, Hermit was supported by grants. It retained the atmosphere of held during the 80s. The uprooting that we had to deal with after the fall of the real socialist system, and actually after even disintegration of the underground and all the opposition, in fact all structures, created an acute need to search for new foundations. Velvet Revolution brought many of the alternative and decent artists into leadership positions, while the former protagonists mostly retreated into the background. Over the course of the decade, the situation changed with the rise of a new generation of descendants, both former regime cadres like Mikoláš Axman, Dominik Lang, Martin Zet, Petr Nikl, Bromová, and the former opponents like Jasen Zoubek, Ivan Kafka, Tobias Hirous, Joachim Topol, daughters of Libor Fara and others. The beginning of the 90s was a time of unprecedented freedom for everyone. The experience of the hitherto forbidden global world then led to a rediscovery of domestic roots, to a renewal of the ties to our own cultural heritage that had been severed by by totalitarianism. Like in this example of my performance, when I invested myself into a Czech tradition of alchemy, but also at that time, Czech Republic was well known producing Semtex bombs for every terrorist around the world. So the Czech chemistry was very popular, and I also worked with Semtex in some projects. This piece, just briefly, was dedicated to Kirchner, Messerschmitt, Santini. So it was related to the Plassy controversial tradition of Baroque situation against the Reformation, etc. So in the 90s, of course, for example, new media scene was somehow very much influenced in the middle of 90s by development of technologies from analog to digital. So it was time when our working with video was digitalized. Of course, from mobile phones, we slowly shifted to internet, and first internet websites appeared, and etc. I think this was a lot also important change in the middle of 90s. Also, I wanted to mention the Orbis Fictus exhibition, which was supported at that time, 1996, by Soros Foundation. But Soros was pushed out of the country. He was not supported to establish Central European University in Prague, and then he moved to Budapest. And he's maybe pushed out of there now. Vienna, okay. In National Gallery also was an interesting event because the first new permanent collection opened in 1995. The director was Jaroslav Andel at the time, also former alternative theoretician who lived through the 80s abroad. And he presented complex selection or overview of Czech performance art history. But this exposition was dismantled by Milan Knižák, former Fluxus member, immediately after his coming to the director's position in 1999. And he brought back this like non-democratic hegemonic attitude to this institution. I wanted also to note the paradoxical international development visible in the history of black market. I participated in black market since middle of 80s. It was established in Poland in 1985 as a East-West project of cooperation, network overcoming the Iron Curtain. But during the time in 1991, two of us, we were quitting or being excluded, excommunicated. And it was interesting that through the 90s, this former, let's say, alternative performance cooperation, European cooperation, tend to become a group system, and it became a trademark. And until the decade of 90s, all the Eastern Europeans were kicked out. Maybe another note to that history is that all this decade, the group operated only, it was just 9 men. The gender issues, of course, were there when I was participating in late 80s on the table, but the group turned to gender balanced a little bit after 2000. So middle of 90s, in 1996, Zygmunt Petrovsky organized the event in Zamek Ujazdowski in Warsaw, reminding these activities, which were very active all since 70s and all through 80s, and somehow in first half of 90s disappeared. So there was, at least my experience is that this Visegrad communication was more alive in 80s, 70s, 80s than in half of 90s. It came slowly back in second half of 90s. Maybe because, of course, there came this famous budget cuts for culture, and our situation, of course, tend to be problematic politically and economically. If there is still some time, yeah. I may just share with you the ideas of black market, because these principles, I think, are again and again coming back to discussion. So the first principle was that it was based from school of attention, which saw the attention in investigation as an essential creative method. Very important was this East-West global network, because at the first beginning it was like East Europe and Western Europe, then Europe and Asia, and later on the global networking. Then open situation and open dialogue as an essential communication strategy. Participation in encounter, what means being in presence, was an essential social condition. Not a group, but ideas in work as an interpersonal research basis. No membership, but cooperation, shared aesthetic quality. No property. Any impulse can occur through each participant. This is quotation. So a kind of organic living form. And I still believe that these principles are valuable for any kind of movement that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm realizing that it looks like the people who are coming to Place were only men. It became some kind of male chauvinistic network, but somehow Gertrude, yeah, because the only one, yeah. So, but actually, it's not true. You know? It's just by accident, maybe the seed of the time. You know?
It was not accident, the time was like that. But I just wanted to mention that from Black Market, there were 4 artists from Black Market. In Place, it was Alistair McLennan, Roy Vara, Jacques Van Poppel, and Warpechowski. But Black Market was not able to put these people together for a common performance. Even it would be perfect in this space. So everyone came as an individual person. Pardon? Sorry for that.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. So just maybe a short reflections of this Black Market and kind of performance network, which is very actually small network, but it's really global in a way, as far as I can see it from distance. So became interweaved in a hermit network, but it all just became one of the many. So I think this is coming back to this phenomenon which was mentioned by Marina, or this heterogenic or heterotopic issue of heterotopics. So I think this is maybe interesting to remember. So who is the next? Who wants to go next? Yeah. Aha, tak Michael.
Me? Okay, I'll keep it short, even though I can echo. So, in some ways, I have a similar path as David was speaking about, to Place through Amsterdam. But I started coming from New York, and not Canada. I studied in New York in the late 80s, 86, 85 to 87, for a master's in sculpture. And I had gone there quite young, so I was suddenly in this late 80s art scene in New York where everyone was trying to be an art star. And the School of Visual Arts had a gallery in Soho, which I showed at other shows. And you were thrust into this kind of system where you were, going to gallery openings, meeting people, trying to get curators or dealers or collectors to your studio. And I was participating in this and was having some people to my studio, which I had rented after school, and was living at the time in New York afterwards. But I also was connected with artist-run spaces, one being Brooklyn Waterfront Artist Coalition in Brooklyn, which had an annual show in Dumbo. At that time was mostly just artists. Now it's a very posh neighborhood. But there was an annual show there that then I began to participate in, a sculpture show. And another artist-run space was Ridge Street Gallery, which was located in the Lower East Side. So these were spaces where artists were paying the rent and having a 2-week show, sometimes 1-week show during the year. And there I was meeting artists and different people who were from abroad that had come to New York, or they had studied and stayed there. But at the same time I was studying visual art, I was very much interested in the new music and experimental improvised music scene, which was happening at the same time. So I was going to concerts there at the same time I was studying art and doing things, and meeting a lot of musicians, composers, experimental intermedia artists at places like Roulette, and then later experimental intermedia, which was Phil Niblock's space. And I found this scene very open and much more dynamic than the art scene, which was about just meeting people, putting your work in a space. It was very competitive in a way. And this scene seemed very open because you had people coming from Europe, from abroad, spending time there, exchanging and going back. So it was through context there that, and others in the art world scene, mostly the artist spaces, that I then decided this was a kind of route that I wanted to follow. So I got rid of my studio and I decided to be more condensed so that I could travel. And I set off for Amsterdam. I had a sabbatical from where I was working at the time at the Bronx Zoo. And I decided to spend 6 months there. The year before I had traveled just on a short trip, and through contacts I had met in New York through these, through the new music scene, I went to a performance in Hertogenbosch at this melt fabric. And there I met Miloš. I met a lot of other Dutch and international other artists there. And the next year when I went back, I was planning to spend that time. I went to visit Miloš because I've heard about Plassi. So then he invited me to go. So it was connected in a way, but I was sort of on a journey to get there. And it took me a while. I traveled across Germany with 2 other artists from Canada and Australia who were traveling there. And it took about 2 days because we made many stops. But when I got to the border, suddenly they couldn't continue in Dresden because I didn't have visas. So for me, I was already on my way. They let me in, so I just walked across. So it was a kind of, very open situation already from the beginning. And when I got to the monastery, there were, people that I knew that I had met in Amsterdam the year before and different things. So it showed me a very different kind of approach away from the object making, studio making, and at the time also the interest in sound. It became very important at the time, and that was the one thing. Like I wrote in the blurb that it was just a very open time and a very improvised time. When you came there, the space was so overwhelming that you got absorbed into it. At least I did. And the instruments that I brought suddenly became huge in that space. It became bigger than anything I'd heard before. So it also had a big influence on type of music and sounds and things I would continue to do from that time. I continued then. The next year I came back after going back to New York for a year, and I decided it was important enough for me to quit my job and just go to Europe and spend time there. And the time spent at the second one, the Hermit Growth Rings, the instruments that I created there are in this exhibition. After making them, I decided I wanted to keep them in Plassi because that's where they belonged in my mind. They became kind of instruments that then, when I returned, I used them, but other people used them. So it made me think a little bit of the earlier talk about art as a commons. For me, it was sort of the work was so connected to the place that I couldn't see it in any other place. Leaving there, it wasn't mine, it was more part of that place. So it was something that stayed with me through that time. And I guess trying to think about how then the 90s at that time was very open. I was thinking how after Plassi ended, the legacy of Plassi, like there was the Orbis Pictus exhibition in '96, but there was a later exhibition that developed into another Orbis Pictus, and that was in 2000 in Rodolphianum, Henish de Her. And at the time, Plassi had just ended in 2000, and I was thinking, okay, what will happen to the instruments there, or Miloš? We went there, and they just had a perfect segue. They went from Plassy to the monastery to the Hnízde Her, which in many respects continued this open, creative atmosphere that had originally started in Plassy. And that, in a way, has continued through, even though things have changed quite a bit from the 90s and from that time. But, yeah, so it's just about, that's good.
Thank you. So just, again, a short comment. It sometimes look that the hermit was only the place where when people who were wearing strange suits and walking slowly and wear some black like overhead or whatever. But in a way, and it was secluded from the reality, but it is just a kind of surface, because even if I would like to, that it would be like this, I couldn't manage. I was not really controlling what is happening there. It was where the people who are coming there, and if they didn't really make some horrible crimes to break something, they could do what they wanted. It slowly fade away, and towards the end of the 90s, we had to ask for permission for everything, and there was always somebody like a control person who was like, "Oh, you have to lock the door, or you have to close the window, or you have to do this," and so actually the place lost its atmosphere of kind of solidarity with the place and among the people. I don't want to romantize it. Sometimes it went a little bit wild, because in the same time, for example, there was a rock concert going on the meadow next to, and there were like 4,000 drunk people walking around, and they were also coming into the monastery and sleeping on the ground. But this is one moment, and the other moment that, for example, the second year, 93, 94, I'm not sure now, and also 93, Vojta and Irena Havlové organized an 93 an event in the Prague Castle, in the Michovna of the Prague Castle. So people who were from in Plassy in this time, they could have a 2-day concerts in the very center, on the kind of heart of the darkness on Prague. So this feeling of seclusion or out of alternative was just fake. It was not real. Martin will have comments. You can sit here or there.
I want to sit here for some reason. Okay. Somehow to show that I try to be disciplined. No. Můžeš, no. To je takový, tak děláš to rukou? Jo. To jsem si teď udělal. Ztrácím minutu, ztrácím čas. Tak mám mluvit do toho? Jo, je to skvělý. Tak nějak nejdřív jenom na začátku. First for the beginning. Hello. I really like this situation that we have this line behind us, and on the projection it's going almost over us. So in this like light situation, maybe I have too light T-shirt, but in the case of others, it looks like crossing, like double crossing, or like being in between two lines. Because I'm very responsible recently, I wrote the text, but I am not about to read it. I have okay, 90s, I wanted to talk similar like Michal Murin. I also got to Plasy after somehow my active part in organizing was over. I was involved in something which nobody knows about, which was the international, we call it also symposium, granary Speicher Křešice, which was happening during 3 years, 91, 92, 93. And mostly international or foreign artists, not only artists, participated, not because I excluded the home scene, but because everybody who I invited from the Czechoslovakia didn't come. Some kind of very nice feeling during these meetings led to continuation of the event. So there were another 3 years happening in Russian village of Chaněvo, and then there were 3 years, one in Kvols in Denmark, one in Turkish island Gökçeada in Turkey, and the last one in 98 in the Danish island of Bornholm in Denmark, because of Danish. Yeah. These ones which were in the 3 years in Russia and one in Denmark, they changed the name from Speicher to small cricket is Medvěďka, in Czech it's Krtonoška, in Danish it's Danaburno. So that was the names of the gathering. The ones on the islands were called Symposium Island. So that's basically it. The group of people was kind of open. There was maybe about 10 core members, let's say, and friends and passers-by. It wasn't financed by any grant. Usually, who was organizing it was finding money, or with collaboration with the friends. We didn't make any systematic documentation. In this moment, I must really emphasize the role of Dan Sperl for the hermit in Plasy, because as you can see from the exhibition, if not Dan Sperl, the archive is good for nothing. It's just the banana boxes. So we didn't have this. We even didn't keep evidence who participated, because we even didn't know the names of everybody who spent some time with us. The whole thing was archived in the head of Gena Voronov from Moscow, who was master of like oral telling the history, but he unfortunately died when he was 50, and the other person who had some materials and who was also like main organizer, his ex-wife Lucy Voronova, because during the last years happened that she became the ex-wife. She didn't want to remember nothing about him, neither about the times related to him. So basically the whole thing is lost. No grants, no archive, no nothing.
The facts, the quotation from Turinberg is very famous.
Okay, 90s for me in Czech, it was two important activities. One related to Plasy, Miloš and Martina, not to talk about men only, and other spinning around Ivan Mitchell. One was based on the place, the one in Plasy. The other was more based about madness. It was the things happening around Ivan. The one I was talking in the first half, I have no idea what it was based on. Maybe it was just, this kind of... We were happy to meet from time to time, so we were organizing the things to meet, and if more people, if other people joining, it was very good. Okay, we didn't know. So, now just few small things related to Plasy. Maybe this slow motion and weird clothing was very good rehearsal for retirement. Second, I realized today, if before I would write the text for the book, that actually the Plasy can be just, accept my construction, even when maybe not absolutely scientific. Maybe it can be something about addition. If we combine the English pronunciation of plus, which is plus, and the way how in Czech we make the plural, because Plasy is the form, the noun in the plural, so it's maybe Plasy is something in Czech like plusy. And there, through this, I realized the connection between Miloš and Ivan, because in Divus, which is Ivan's kind of trademark, you have also two Plasy, you see?
It looks like we have still two planned presentations. Three? Yeah. Bara doesn't have. No. Alexander, who would talk more about contemporary situation, and Ivan, who will talk about more his kind of trajectory from the 90s until today. Trajectory. Yeah. So in a way, I think, it's better we ask Ivan. you know, which I'm very happy that he finally made it to here, because he was not so much reacting on my emails because he was somewhere out, somewhere. But I think Ivan is a good example of somebody who managed, let's think, a lot of things which I failed. You know, I failed many things, but among the other things which I failed was the Plassy project or Hermit project. So, but a good living example of somebody who managed to go all this very difficult and complicated way from 1989 until 2023, are still keeping some of the original like dreams and a kind of vision. You know, is Ivan. And we collaborated actually on the end of the Plassy project when the catalog of the last exhibition, which was called somehow by accident Fairy Tale, was actually produced and printed in a collaboration with Divus. So just my comment to this.
Thank you for the introduction. I must make clear that this happened in a little bit of confusion because at the beginning I've got an email from Milos that this is going to happen and I was interested just to see it. So I replied in a way that, yeah, it's great. I would love to see it, and I can bring some magazines and just want to be in the audience, but I end up here, which is quite unexpected for me. Yeah, not really unexpected, and I got an emails that I will be talking, and but during the last 5 years, when I was trying to follow Hakim Bey's teaching and create some autonomous zones, I was mainly crafting and building it, and I've lost most of my speaking capabilities, especially in English. So I'll try to keep the comedian tone set by Martin, but I don't know if it will be possible. So in the early 90s, as a group of students, we set a strange publishing house in 1992, 1993, where we've been publishing strange books and magazines. At that time, it was called Divus, the magazine, and in 97, a couple of editors came to Divus, and we decided to have a real critical magazine called Umělec. And we've heard rumors that there's somewhere in the fields there's some hermit, and we were watching it from a distance, because for us it was like something like a alchemical hut from Fulcanelli's books. And also we were young students without an experience, so sometimes we misinterpret or didn't understand really clearly what's going on there. Also, we were trying to get as much knowledge from Milos as possible, and he was very helpful. He was the first one who introduced us Hakim Bey, and first what we did, we absolutely fucked up the translation because we sometimes didn't understand the real meaning, and Milos was then laughing at us. And that's why I brought also old copies. It's really rare. It's from 1997, 8 and 9 copies of the magazine. You can flip through, you can have it. There's another pile for the museum, and there's also few copies from year 2000, 2005, 2007, and then the last issue from 2016, where we've been still able to publish something. And there's one copy which is still in a computer and never been published. Oh yeah, yeah. So, before I forget, I want to react to your remark about about me, that I'm still keeping doing it. Yeah, the question is always on what costs. Yeah, so it's very difficult to sometimes to remember the ruins behind me. So until the year 2000, the 90s, it was really a time of enthusiasm, naivety, and illusions. You sent us the text where you, in the middle, you're saying like, yeah, it was a, sadly, you're remarking that it was a naivety and it failed because it was naivety. But I think naivety is one of the biggest force, and illusions as well. So without having them, I would probably not be able to do anything. And back to the topic. Around 2000, when the 90s and the publishing house grew too much, we started to be too international. We were publishing books and magazines in many languages, and we kept doing it for almost 15, 16 years, from year 2000 until 2016. To keep going it, we were using like capitalist tools to cover the independent and almost like crazy activities. Like we were setting companies around the world. When it bankrupt, we ran away, and we were traveling on fake documents. We were using fake plates on the cars, sometimes to cross the borders. It was really, really wild. And as it was too much, we were having so many places where we have like editorials, like where we were, and storages, and where we do exhibitions. We opened one center in London, another one we had in Prague, in Berlin as well. And yeah, it was really difficult to cover the costs. And we were successful in a bit of public funding, but not enough, of course. Yeah, because the concepts of many of these projects weren't possible to cover from public funds because they were too strange. And in the year 2016, we realized that we can't carry on without having a real autonomous zone, which is our own zone, which is not someone else's zone, which is not someone else's building or someone else's field. And because we will be always kicked out when we are not necessary anymore, or when we don't have enough money for the rent and production. So we've decided that we are going to buy our own ruin and set the place to live and work. So before we bought anything, we tried a test zone near Prague. There is a former paper mill in Vrany nad Vltavou. That paper mill we occupied for like 4 years, not more, I think. We moved all the production there. We had a printing house, we had the gallery, cafe, everything, and for 4 years we were testing if we are able to manage such a monster. And then, of course, there was a time to leave because the owner also wants to raise the rent, and is not anymore interested in art activities. So I was traveling around our country, and I was looking for abandoned ruin, and finally I find one. That's the outcome. We are working on it manually for 5 years, and right now it's possible to live there. We've got a printing house, we've got a gallery, we've got studios for artists, and a nice garden. I think the most interesting is the link, the second link with where you can see how it is built. You can go down, yeah, úplně dolů po ten text. Yeah, and you can flip. Just click on one, and you can, with the arrows, you can go. Yeah, that's the area, and that's the history. And you can go quickly. Don't worry. There's nothing really important on certain image. You can just see the. You can click on one and go through the gallery with the arrows, or with on the edge of the image. Yeah, there's the arrow. Yeah, that's it. It's a former German factory for making threads. No. It's on the border. It's near German border in Krásná Lípa in Kyiv, Czech Switzerland. There's a border with Poland and Germany, so we can always run away to another country. So just make it short. This was, in fact, inspired by Miloš and his introduction to Hakim Bey's ideas. Although we fucked up the translation and didn't understand it well, the ideas grown inside us, and although Miloš is saying he failed, in fact, we inherited this, so you are part of it. Yeah, I must say, like after 5 years of building, there's not enough like energy in me to create any program for it. So honestly, if you have any idea, just bring it. Sorry? Yeah, the train is tomorrow, so you can join us. Well, how many minutes I did already? 3. Yeah, thank you. Sorry? Okay. So at the end, I want to thank to Miloš for inspiration, for invitation, and also especially for today, I want to.
So, like what is it all about? And so.
First of all, does everybody remember this? Stick up your hands. Anybody remembers this sign? Who remembers this?
I didn't.
You must make hands like this.
Yeah. Maybe somebody recognizes this sign. You remember it? So this is the snake on Plassey's monastery, right? No, it's the cross. So I bought a T-shirt the other day on Waterloo Square, and so there is a cross and there's a snake through it. So this is the first sign I remember from Plassey when I first got there in 1993. Then I ran into you somehow, and I came in 1994, 1995, and 1996. So for those who, probably I was going to buy more of these T-shirts, but they only had small sizes. So then I realized I was going to buy this one and give the example. So thank you all for coming. I'm really happy to. This is basically the first meeting of Plassey that I had since 1995, 1996. Obviously, like Michael, like David, like mostly all of us, we moved around. Crossing the borders, that was one of the themes that attracted me personally. So I'm, just briefly, I'm a filmmaker and a mentor to young filmmakers and photographers in Amsterdam, among a few other initiatives that our NGO Moonfilm runs in Amsterdam, among which is the Amir project, which I drummed up after Corona last year, in which we teach young refugees, so young newcomers to our country and our city, the first steps in filmmaking, in storytelling. We teach them how to dream in film and to keep dreaming and creating even in an environment where artistic endeavors are not key for survival. Because mostly that is step up into society, education, making money, etc. So yeah, go ahead, just take pictures. You can just click. You have to zoom though. You can find the website under its name, amirproject.nl. So about Plassey, Hermit and its legacy. Recently, I ran into a copy of, do you have the Meridian Crossings catalog? Yeah, it's in the exhibition. So, so it's a very rare item, and I found it on Waterloo Square, just in a flea market, right? And I glanced at it, and I took it in my hand, and I saw your picture, and my picture, or whatever. And I asked the guy, what do you want for it? Because it's, and I didn't say it was a rare item. And it had the CD in it with your recordings and others. And he said, you can have it, because I just spilled a bottle of beer over it. And then so I got it for free, and I dried it up, and the CD runs perfectly. So then I rang you up, and then you said, well, do you want to write a text, you know, for the new thing that we're doing? And I thought, you know, this is a moment of synchronicity. And this is a feeling that not just I, but many people have had, a feeling of synchronicity of either or, coming to Schattenberg or whatever. And we didn't mention that. We said that until now, today, we didn't mention the concept of synchronicity, so I thought I'd just drop it. So, however, your theme was we need to speak about the 90s and hopefully bridge the gap towards our current days. And I will try to achieve that here and now. Briefly, so spirit of the 90s, I sensed that I was 23, so very young. I was one of the rookies when I came. There was this option of change, if not total change, from both East and West. This was the sentiment. It didn't mean that we were actually achieving that. I visited Plassey 3 times and made works in 1995 and 1996. After, for example, me and Michael and David and some others moved on to Schattenberg after the exhibitions. And that was kind of like the feeling that we had. Just, going from place to place and doing site-specific work. You were there as well. Yeah, I remember your face, but I don't know what you did. But then again, she was there, so after 30 years, there's still this crazy connection. I didn't do much in Schattenberg. I failed, I think, but I made a nice documentation on video, which was rare at the time. Is it working? Okay, good. Plassey, as Michael also mentioned, was huge. And it, in size, it was just fundamentally over your head. So even as a filmmaker, when you're used to having projections or when you're used to exhibiting large photo works, it was very hard to fill the space. You were assigned to a certain space, you opted for a certain place, and then you realize, my God, how am I going to fill this with meaning? And then one of you also said that this day, that this was something very important, that you realized that the work you were making was only just a small piece, and you had to present it in such a way, through lighting or an entrance or a sound that was added to it, that gave it extra meaning, instead of just simply putting it on the wall and saying, hey, this is great, right? Look at it. So the second year when I came, I had, so the first time was my initiation, and I realized that, whoa, this is over my head. I realized I was going to have to make something very simple. And that turned out to be a camera obscura of 40 meters long by 50 meters. A pinhole, basically. The same pinhole that Leonardo da Vinci had made 5 centuries before, but then on a very large scale. I dropped the idea of actually creating a photograph through the pinhole. I created it as an installation. So you walked into the space, it was totally dark, and your eyes suddenly open up slowly, gradually, to the light that came through. I think I had 5 or 6 pinholes in the space. So before you could actually see anything, your physical capabilities had to adapt to darkness, and then light would appear. It's basically the same thing that happens in an analog camera on a silver plate. Did you put? Okay. We can next one. Okay, great. So what Plassey had. So I'm leaving my text now. I'm just rattling off. What I'd learned from the years previous to that is that it's great to hang up a photo. It's great to do a performance or an installation, if you wish. But then were these fantastic musicians also present, like Rajesh Mehta, and I think there was a percussionist also joining in the vernissage of that event. And he immediately grasped the concept of what I had been doing. To create the camera obscura, the size of that is quite complicated, and when I had finished, I was kind of happy, but it needed something extra, right? And then Rajesh moved in, and he felt what it did to him, like not seeing anything, and he started mumbling kind of on his trumpet, sort of primordial sounds, prehistorical music that he produced. And so gradually, when his eyes opened up, his music became a melody. And so this was a perfect vernissage for an installation that started with basically nothing, darkness, and then you had this display of light coming from projections, which were basically generated by sunlight. And the great thing was also that when the sun came through, so through the pinholes, you would hear cars drive by from left. They were driving from left to right. You would see an image tilted, and you would see the car driving from right to left, so the other direction. You would hear birds flying, and you would know that they were over your head, but you would see them flying on the floor, because I had a few pinholes on the floor with some flour, so white substance on the floor, and people would actually just look at that and say, just look at the sky and the leaves and all that, and they would leap over, because it was, to them it was a real hole in the ground. So it took 5 minutes for the eye to adjust, but after that it became a completely meditative space. People could sit there for half an hour, and not speak, but just observe. So this is, I believe, one of the stronger things I was able to do, and it was only there because there was a space. There was a vacant space like your space, So you don't, I realized I don't need much more than just the space, and darken it, and then there's sunlight, and then you can work, So, I think many of the people that were in Plassy also had to start from this, like I only have my camera, or I only have a dance that I want to do, or whatever, and then you had to fill that space, and I thought it was a very important initiation in what you should be thinking of when you have little and you still have to do a lot. So thank you for that. I don't want to elaborate on whatever I did. So Plassy felt like every new installation, film, photo series, performance, felt like a new birth. The exhibition here at Moor also displays this concept quite beautifully. I would like to pass this feeling and knowledge on to others, and I did not choose to expand on any of my works in Plassy because our timing does not allow it, and also I have another message which I find more appropriate. Bearing the hermit spirit and responsibility in mind, I try to serve my fellow man and convince him or her that we must always initiate change ourselves. I see a great potential in the documentation of the gatherings at Plassy, as they can function as a guideline, a blueprint, if you wish, for similar movements reaching out to a younger generation. So that's not us, it's the next generation, it's our children. So I will not speak of either utopia or dystopia, but rather about what I believe can be learned from coming to Plassy and Prague in the 90s, and how this can apply to a new generation. Plassy and the gatherings during the Hermit Festival summers in the Czech Republic have taught me how incredibly important it is to be able to bring artists, musicians, free thinkers together, and very importantly, to present together, to think and shape a certain concept together. Often we did this from our own interests and fundings, so we didn't, Plassy never funded us up front. We had the desire to come there, so we did. And as Milos also said this morning, we had to start from scratch. There was nothing, as one of the artists who came to visit also mentioned. There was just simply nothing. There was no infrastructure. However, it allowed us to be free, in a way. It was our task to fill the space with sound, images, and movements. And most importantly, we had to build on the site the building itself. Many works were created as site-specific works. Academic training and exhibition are usually completely different, meaning less hands-on and more individualistic. An important aspect of the Hermit meetings was and is that everyone went there completely, everyone went there to complement each other, the location, the theme, the history of a hidden gem, a massive and impressive architectural universe in the heart of Europe of its own, which can be perceived as a metaphor for the rediscovery of ourselves. I think I elaborate a little bit too long here, but the spirit of the 90s very much had that enshrined in itself, trying to change everything before. In Plassy and those who had heard about it via others, having been or not having been to Plassy, so to speak. I guess it sounds like having been to the moon or to the Himalayas. Returning from artists in residencies such as Plassy or Schattenberg, for example, I saw endless possibilities in both cities and on the countryside. Also matured and freed from school and discipline, I gradually became better, using a transformational insight which enables others in their own way to think farther, write, create, or heal. In short, to grow. The documentation and works of those meetings still have an enormous appeal. Each time I sit down with anyone attracted to living a creative and fruitful, fulfilling life, and when I show them the documentation of Hermit, the overall impact of it is taking the reader to an imaginary world, perhaps a bit lost and forgotten, but still there. It is within our reach, for me and for them. And that is what binds us then in that very moment, I believe. I would argue that the power of the enormous documentation that Miloš and his partners have created can serve to inspire and encourage any new group of young makers to create and live more together, and to do this regularly, once a year or 2 years, for example. So every year or every 2 years. The continuing trend of recent decades is one of enhanced individualism and self-development. More diplomas, more status, more money, more traveling, whatever. This has little to do with the connection within our deeper consciousness, where we should be listening to and sensing to the core of our existence and humanity. I remember passing the borders of the Czech Republic in the early 90s, and every sign in the Czech Republic said non-stop. I don't know if you remember that. You crossed the border, you came to the gray zone, or whatever you want to call it. It said non-stop beer, non-stop hookers, non-stop cigarettes, non-stop bar. Everything was non-stop. When I walked around Olomouc in the early morning, empty streets, today I see casino or bazaar. I even had to find Alibaba to get a first coffee next to the Olomouc train station. I leisurely observe people ride trams faster, drink more cappuccinos, but read fewer books, and all have a mobile phone they spend hours on, so it seems, most likely every day. At the start of the 90s, I was so happy to see commuters on buses, trams, and trains reading books between home and work stops in Prague. Nobody owned a mobile phone, and it was way before the use and broadband options of the internet. The fact that we are only building on something that was the 80s, the 90s, and on into the current millennium is not something we can change. What we can do is raise awareness about what it is like to be together and how life can be lived differently. In a world which focuses on personal development, we are winning the common, that which we already share, simply because we are human. The meetings in Plassy have proven to be a catalyst for me and many others. Many others. How many others? 400? 500? In a much broader context than a purely artistic one. A world built on common values is a world that ensures that the individual is embedded in a broader social structure, which is simply healthier for his body and mind. Artists, musicians, writers, thinkers were and are the architects of our shared future. They were and still will remain so if we can guarantee the aforementioned. I think I should conclude because I hate talking too much, but I think it kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Thank you.
Comments? 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 Yes?
How long time we have? Like,
I think we should now
maybe
enough time to start the discussion.
Yeah. If I can just briefly sum it up, I think we now have some time for the discussion, definitely. It's actually up to us, like how much time we want to spend here. Just we should be on time at the church, at the concert at 7:30, which is just opposite, which is a problem. And we should see the installation. So that's the question. Or of course, if you're staying here until tomorrow, we can do the curators tour tomorrow, or we can have like a 30-minute discussion, then have a 30-minute tour on the exhibition, or wherever the time brings us. I think we addressed several topics here, and before I let you speak, I will just briefly maybe sum it up, because in the first contributions we heard about, or we talked about archives, and changing roles of galleries, or their adaptation, their possible adaptation towards new forms of archiving and taking care of our common heritage. Then we heard about the 90s sellout and about different, or the actually change of the role of art in the 90s, and of the role of artists themselves. We even now in the last contribution we talked about the enhanced individualism, which is something that's repeated here during the day. Of course, then there's the big topic of personal networking that Dusan Barok addressed, and personal networking of each of us being part of different networks throughout the world, and throughout the Central Europe, most intensely. And yeah, then the subcultures were addressed, and their role and importance in bringing up the society, or in changing the society maybe in a way, and yeah, different roles of different cultures, subcultures, underground cultures, autonomous zones, individual independent spaces, and so on. So we can maybe also talk about what is this independence, and so on. Then, of course, there were contributions about the artist networks and artist archives, and the things that we heard from many artists who were present at Hermit and who were part of broader networks internationally. Then we talked about failures and successes, which is, I think, also a big topic. That actually what we, if we fail, or if you failed at doing your stuff during the 90s, or what were the successes actually? Where are we now in this opposition of failures and successes? And of course, always there's this question of what were the times? What was the recent history? Were these the wild times, the happy times, or the good old times, or what it was? So that was just a brief sum up, and maybe we can now start a discussion. And I think Vita Havranek had the first one. Oh.
If I can start, I have just one question to everyone maybe, but it's something that really keeps my mind since what about we are speaking about this experience, right? And then around, you said 97 to around 2000, you started to withdraw a little bit. And in art, what happened around 2000, 2002, that the first generation of politicized artists, leftist artists, came and started to look at the 90s. And now it's already the second generation that comes. And both this generation, they look at the 90s and they say it was Sodom and Gomorrah. It was catastrophe. Why? It's not because of culture, but it's mainly because that actually all state property was privatized, all services are privatized, but they're more or less saying you were the witnesses of that, right? You were not the actors, but you were part of this, and you didn't realize. And even worse, actually, they say, look, in the 80s there was this artist association, they had manes, they had certain, properties that belonged to the official union of artists, and it disappeared. It was tunneled, it disappeared, and what is today available for the artist union? Nothing, literally zero. So that's why they see this period as being a catastrophe for them, because they didn't have any kind of heritage, material heritage. They have to look again for small spaces, with more difficult ground. So my question is actually how do we kind of connect our experience of the 90s and these kind of views of the 90s? How can we? I think it's great that this position that you hear, that it's not kind of dramatic. Like so it can be dramatic sometimes. People dispute when they start to discuss about it. It happened to me at school, at different places that we discuss this question. So what do you think about this kind of contradiction? Right? It's a historical contradiction in a way. So can we? How can we kind of face it, or what to say about it? What would be your take on that?
I would like to respond to this briefly, but before I respond, I just want to add one thing that I wanted to say in my presentation and forgot, and it is connected to Plus C and other places like this, that it was also the first projects that introduced the so-called site-specific here in this country. And then after Plus C, it was, for example, 4 days in Move, and many other. Then Tomáš Žižka with Mnichovo Hradiště, where already it was focused on site-specific. So I just wanted. Mama, Papa, exactly. So we had a lot of these site-specific projects, and it was connected also to the squatting scene, where in squats, naturally the site-specific started to happen. So it's just one of the things that was not mentioned, and I would like to stress it out. And in response to what Vítek was saying is exactly, because what I was talking about, this reaction of the system against the youth projects and cultural projects was so aggressive, especially because we started to address these issues. We were not silent, and we were not deaf and blind. So we could see that the idealism of the 1990 and 91 is getting vanished, and it's becoming all organized by the organized crime and bribes. And if you hear even people like Petr Pidhart and other people, when he was the prime minister in that time, and he was confronted with bribes when he was offered millions of crowns to support certain legislation, and he refused, and so we were really witnessing this. We were witnessing the horrible corruption and tunneling and everything, but we were not able to really realize what is happening. You could see it, but you had no idea what is actually going on. You could only criticize, and because we were one of the few voices, then of course, and it was not only this, it was racism, which was, these were our issues, like racism, which was really in those 90s, it was big issue that the first racist murders happened, one after another. Almost every half year there was somebody killed because of racist issues. Protection of environment, abuse of animals, women issues, this is everything that we were stressing out. And of course, the society just didn't want to listen to it. And if it was connected with certain spaces where this, because in our place, the feminist groups were meeting, animal rights groups were meeting, human rights groups were meeting, and we were followed by secret services. This is another thing, that after we were followed before the revolution, then the BIS started to follow independent organizations and environmental organizations. And Stanislav Devátý, which was director of BIS, he was one of the dissidents who almost died in the prison during communist times, and now he was directing the organization which was organizing spying of youth organizations, And we were able to discover this because we had the connections to the government. So the vice premier, Jan Kalvoda, came to us and told us, be careful because you are followed by the secret services, And we gained information from this. and organized a press conference in our space in the Black Hand Center, where on the press conference we handed out to the journalists documentation that we are followed by the secret services. And it became a big issue in those times. So we were really we started to be under very strong pressure just because we were addressing these kind of issues. And of course, money for art, for culture, were disappearing. Like you had this Prague Cultural Foundation, which was established, and there was dedicated millions of crowns. And on the first launch, they spent 250,000 crowns just for banquet, and so on and so on. You know, National Foundation Fund, which was established, and billions of crowns were deposited for development of non-profit sector, and it was all vanished. Nothing remains from this money because it was all gone. So yes, exactly. This was the opposite side of the 90s. That there was certain naivety that we were feeling like yes, we are getting supported and everything, but on the same time, flow of money was disappearing, and it just came back like a boomerang.
Oh, okay. Is it working? Yeah, is it working? Okay. Just a short note. I think there is for me, there is a big difference, because if we evaluate 70s, 80s, and 90s, we evaluated from real experience, and those people are looking at these times from ideological perspective. So that's for me basic difference.
Ivan?
Yeah, so I'll try to respond a little bit more simple way, and maybe it will sound naive, but I faced this question raised by Vít many times already from the side of students. And there's also an article about that in one of the issue when I was really forced to think about this problem. And in 1989, I was, as many others here, one of the students who were striking in the streets, and we started the occupation of the universities. And we were quite straight in it, and we really know in a couple of weeks or months during this movement how the future society should look. There was really nothing about like capitalism and so on. There was no word about it. Really, our view was absolutely different. But in a couple of months, we just gave the power back to the adults, back to the old men. They were different men, but they were corrupted the same way, or maybe different way, but corrupted anyway. Because they said to us, and we trusted them, but they said to us, please students, return to school, leave it on us. We know what you want, and we really trusted them, and that was the biggest failure. It's really sad, you don't have a second chance. We lost it, honestly. Once you won the revolution, you should keep the power and do the changes yourself. So the situation you're describing in 93, 94 was already too late. It was lost. We gave the power back in 90. In 4 months, we gave the power back. But we were the generation who won the revolution. But we lost it in a couple of months.
But you had a president who was poet, excuse me.
No, but it was a different generation.
Okay.
Really. If you want the revolution, you're a student, it's a revolution of your generation. You should lead it and you should make the changes. No, you shouldn't listen to anyone. Otherwise you lose it.
Can I? Yeah. I have just a technical comment. I'm not sure. I feel kind of uneasy because we are keeping all the people here after their working hours, and we are not in the autonomous culture zone, but in the institution. And I was always, when I was, for example, working in the National Gallery, I felt very sorry for the people who were building the installations. But just, huh? Yeah, 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 yeah. But yeah, just back to the 90s. I can send out. I have a longer text which I didn't read, which I tried to sum up. You know what were kind of the neural points from my subjective view when the things started to change and break down. And I agree with Ivan, and whatever it is, we lost our case in the beginning of the 90s for like different tendency of our society. It's true, but I think it's not really lost case. You know, we are still in the position to change something. Maybe it's again coming from my kind of naive ideas that if you active even on a small scale, and there are more people active on a small scale, you know, they are able to change something to the more positive side. But the bad side of it, that I think that this kind of tendency to fascism and nationalism and ignorance is only one aspect of the changed world we are, like, of changing situation we are in. Because even if we manage to change our society to the more open and free and not run by corporations, society is still facing the climate change, which will change everything to something which is probably better not to dream about, you know, today. And I think it's also one of the things which is different from the 90s. That there was some weak idea that it's going to the bad side or bad side with our environment, but we still felt that it's not really the issue. But now it's clear that it is the core of our destiny.
I offer to Vitek one other possible view. I must say I am not really happy about this view, but it's also one possible way to understand what was happening here in the 90s. And it is actually the thing that there was the Cold War, right? And we actually lost the Cold War. And even when we had the feeling we are the winners, we were treated like the one who lost the war.
Yeah, but let's finish with something positive.
So maybe.
If you don't mind, I will thank everybody who participated and who came, and of course, mainly Jakub and Bara, and that even I think it's a miracle that this exhibition could happen in officials exhibition. or institution, and it's great that I think it's big effort that that you are who are here, that you made this decision to come, even from Prague and such distant places, and Kiev. And I think we have now a little bit of time to to see the exhibition for 15 minutes, just to walk quickly through, because some people maybe are leaving tomorrow morning. So if you are interested, so we can go. Yeah? Yeah.
Já bych ještě formálně rád zakončil tuto událost také pro naše účastníky, kteří byli online. I would like to say goodbye also to our viewers online who are viewing this event either live or as a video documentation which will be published on the siat.space. Thank you.